Welcome back to the Slow Almanac. Tonight, we are on a forested hillside beside a charcoal kiln. The kiln is sealed. It has been burning slowly for 2 days already. It will keep burning for another 2 or 3 days after tonight. There is no hurry. There is nothing to watch. There is almost nothing to hear. Let your shoulders settle. Let your hands rest wherever they have fallen. If your eyes are open, let them close. The night is warm near the kiln, and the air smells of wood and heat, and something older than both of those things. You don't need to go anywhere. You are already there. The hillside is steep and quiet. The trees here are dense, a mix of broadleaf hardwoods, their trunks narrow and pale, growing close together the way trees do when the light comes from directly above, and there is no reason to spread wide. The ground between them is soft with old leaves, years of them, pressed into something between soil and felt. Your feet find it without looking. The kiln is set into the slope. It is not a large structure. From the outside, it looks like a low dome of earth, a mound, perhaps the height of a person's chest, perhaps 4 or 5 paces across at its widest. It is the color of the hillside itself. Dark soil, pale clay, a little gray where the surface has dried. There are no windows. There are no seams you can see. At one end, near the base, there is a small opening, sealed now with a plug of clay that has been smoothed over by hand. At the other end, higher up, a narrow flue runs out of the top of the dome, barely wider than a fist. From the flue, a thin thread of smoke rises. It is pale, almost white. It rises straight up for a short distance, then bends gently with whatever small movement of air is passing over the hillside tonight, and then it is gone, absorbed into the dark above the canopy. If you didn't know to look for it, you might not notice it at all. The kiln is warm, not hot from where you are standing. You can approach it, put your hand near the surface, and feel the warmth coming off the earth, like the warmth that comes off a stone wall in the late afternoon. It is a gentle, steady warmth. It has been this temperature, or close to it, for most of the past 2 days. It will be this temperature tomorrow. You sit down on the slope, a few paces uphill from the kiln. The ground is soft. Your back finds the base of a narrow tree. From here, you can see the full curve of the dome below you, and the thin, pale thread of smoke rising from the flue, and the dark line of the forest beyond. The sky, where you can see it through the canopy, has the deep blue of late evening. There are no stars visible through the leaves, but you know they are there. The air smells of smoke, but not the sharp, acrid smoke of an open fire. This is a slower, softer smell, something between wood and earth and warm stone. It settles in the back of the throat without irritating. It is the smell of a process that is almost entirely hidden, happening inside a sealed chamber in the dark. Inside the kiln, stacked upright in careful rows, is wood. Oak, mostly, cut from the trees on this hillside and the hillsides nearby. the same narrow-trunked hardwoods you can see all around you now. The wood has been arranged so that the pieces stand on their ends, close together, the way books stand on a shelf. Hundreds of pieces filling the chamber almost entirely. The kiln was sealed around them, and then a fire was set at the mouth, and then the mouth was closed, and then the slow work began. That work is happening now. Around you, the hillside is quiet. The trees stand. The smoke rises. The kiln holds its warmth. And inside, in the sealed dark, the wood is becoming something else entirely. Let me bring you back to where you are sitting. You are on a forested hillside beside a low earthen dome. The dome is sealed. Inside it, stacked wood is slowly changing. The air around you is warm and smells of something ancient and clean. The smoke from the flue is thin and pale and rises without hurry into the dark above the trees. This is a charcoal kiln, a simple one, built from the earth of the hillside itself, shaped by hand, sealed with clay. There is no machinery here. There are no gauges, no readouts, no moving parts. The kiln works by holding heat inside a space that has been cut off from the air. The wood inside cannot burn, not really, because burning requires oxygen, and the oxygen has been used up. What is happening instead is something slower and stranger and more complete. The temperature inside the kiln right now is somewhere between 200 and 400 degrees, measured by the scale where water freezes at 0 and boils at 100. You cannot feel that temperature from where you sit. The earth is a good insulator. The dome holds the heat inside, and what reaches the outer surface is only the residue of it, the warmth that has leaked through several inches of packed soil and clay. The flue at the top of the dome is the kiln's only opening. It is not an accident that it is narrow. The width of the flue controls how much air can enter and how much gas can leave, and therefore controls the temperature inside. The person who built this kiln, and who has been tending it for the past 2 days, adjusts the flue by degrees, opening it a little, closing it a little, reading the color and the density of the smoke to understand what is happening inside. It is a skill that takes years to learn, and it is done almost entirely by observation and memory. Tonight, the smoke is pale and thin. That is a good sign. It means the kiln is in a particular phase of the process, a phase we will come to in a moment. It means the wood inside has already passed through the first stage of its transformation and is somewhere in the middle of the second, and the person who tends this kiln is satisfied with what they see and has gone to sleep and will return before dawn to check again. You are alone on the hillside. The kiln is doing its work without you. The trees are doing their work without you. The only thing you are asked to do is sit here in the warm dark and let the night pass. The smoke rises, a thin, pale thread. The warmth comes off the dome in slow, even waves. The leaves above you are still. The story of what is happening inside this kiln is a story about what wood is made of and what happens when you take almost everything away. Wood, at its core, is a structure built from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, woven together into long chains and rings of molecules. Cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin. These are the materials that make a tree. The cellulose gives the fibers their strength. The lignin binds them together. The hemicellulose fills in between. Together, they make something that can hold up the weight of a full canopy of leaves through decades of wind and rain and ice. They are not simple materials. They have taken a long time to build. When the kiln was first sealed and the fire set at the mouth, the temperature inside began to rise. At first, slowly. The wood does not change much in the first stage. What happens first is the simplest thing. The water leaves. All wood holds water. Even wood that has been cut and left to dry for months holds water in its cells. Bound water, locked into the structure of the fibers themselves. As the temperature in the kiln climbs past 100 degrees, this water begins to move. It turns to steam. It travels through the wood, through the tiny channels that once carried sap from root to leaf, and it finds its way to the surface, and it leaves through the flue as vapor. This is the first thing the smoke tells you. In the earliest hours of the kiln's work, the smoke is heavy and white, thick with steam, with the moisture that the wood is releasing. The kiln, in these first hours, is essentially drying the wood from the inside out, using the heat of the small fire at its mouth. The wood does not change its shape. It does not change its color, not yet. It is simply becoming drier and lighter and emptier. The steam phase can last many hours. The temperature inside the kiln does not rise much during this time, because the energy of the heat is being used up by the work of turning water into vapor. The wood absorbs the heat, and the heat goes into the water, and the water leaves, and the wood absorbs more heat. It is a patient process. The kiln tends itself through this phase without much need for adjustment. When the water is gone, the temperature begins to rise again, and now the wood begins to change in a different way. Between roughly 150 and 250 degrees, the hemicellulose begins to break down. Hemicellulose is the most fragile of the three main components of wood. It is the first to give way to heat. Its long molecular chains begin to come apart. The fragments that are released are gases and vapors. Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, acetic acid, methanol, and others. These are the volatile compounds that have been locked inside the wood since the tree built them, sometimes decades ago. These gases travel through the wood and out through the flue. The smoke changes. It becomes thinner, less white, more translucent, sometimes with a faint blue tinge, sometimes with a yellowish cast, depending on which compounds are leaving at a given moment.
The person who tends the kiln reads these colors the way a reader reads a page, slowly and with attention, adjusting the flue to keep the temperature rising at the right pace. The wood inside the kiln is beginning to darken. The cells are still intact. The grain of the wood, the rings that record each year of the tree's growth, the tiny channels that once carried water and sugar, all of this is still there, still in its original arrangement, but the material that fills those structures is changing. The hemicellulose is gone.
The cellulose is beginning to follow. Cellulose breaks down at higher temperatures, somewhere between 250 and 350 degrees. It is more resistant than hemicellulose, more tightly organized, but it goes the same way in the end. Its chains come apart, more gases leave, more volatiles escape through the flue. The smoke continues to thin, and then there is the lignin. Lignin is the last to go, and it does not go all at once. It breaks down slowly over a wide range of temperatures, releasing its own set of compounds, phenols and other aromatic molecules, the ones that give the smoke its particular smell, the deep, resinous smell that you can detect even from where you are sitting on the hillside. Lignin is stubborn. It holds on, but it goes, eventually, like everything else. What is left when the water and the hemicellulose and the cellulose and the lignin have all been driven off is almost entirely carbon. Not graphite, not diamond, just carbon in an amorphous form, a disordered lattice, holding the shape of the wood it came from, but made of almost nothing else. The cell walls are still there, the grain is still there, the growth rings are still there, but they are made of carbon now, pure and black, light and strong, holding the memory of the tree in a form that will not rot, will not burn easily, will not decay for a very long time. This is charcoal. This is what the kiln is making in the dark on the hillside tonight. There is a final stage to the kiln's work, and it is the most demanding and the most delicate. After the volatile gases have been driven off, after the hemicellulose and the cellulose and most of the lignin have left the wood, the temperature inside the kiln is raised carefully to a much higher level. In kilns that produce the finest charcoal from this kind of dense hardwood, the temperature in this final stage can reach 800, 900, sometimes over 1,000 degrees. At these temperatures, the remaining impurities in the carbon structure are driven off. The residual hydrogen and oxygen that have been bound into the carbon matrix, the last traces of the organic compounds that made the wood what it was, are finally released. The smoke at this stage is almost invisible. A shimmer of heat above the flue, perhaps a faint haze, but almost nothing. The kiln is running almost clean. What is leaving now is not smoke in any ordinary sense. It is the last breath of the tree, the final release of the elements that built it, rising into the air above the hillside and dispersing. Inside the kiln, the charcoal has taken on its final character. carbon structure has become more ordered, more crystalline in places, harder and denser than ordinary charcoal. When a piece is struck against another, it rings, not a dull thud, but a clear, high note, almost like ceramic or like a very small bell. This is the sound of a carbon structure that has been refined to something close to its limit. It is a sound that the people who tend these kilns listen for when the charcoal is finally drawn out and cooled as a test of quality. But that is days away. Tonight, the kiln is still in the middle of its work. The grain of the wood, the thing I mentioned earlier, the rings and channels and fibers that record the tree's life, is preserved in the charcoal with extraordinary fidelity. Under a lens, a cross-section of the finished charcoal looks almost identical to a cross-section of the original wood. The early wood and the late wood of each annual ring are still distinct. The early wood, grown in spring when water was plentiful, is less dense and shows as a lighter band. The late wood, grown in summer when the tree slowed down, is denser and shows as a darker band. These bands are still visible in the charcoal. They are made of carbon now, but they remember what they were. The vessels that carried water from root to leaf, some of them no wider than a few thousandths of a millimeter, are still open in the charcoal. They are empty now, but they are there. This is one of the reasons the finest charcoal made from dense hardwood has such an unusual surface area. If you were to unfold all the surfaces of all the tiny channels and pores in a single small piece of it, the vessels, the ray cells, the fiber walls, the total surface area would be, depending on the size of the piece, somewhere in the range of several hundred square meters. All of that in a piece of charcoal you could hold in your hand. This is why it burns the way it does when it is finely used. The surface area means that the carbon is in contact with a great deal of air at once, but in a controlled way. The channels regulate the flow. The structure meters out the combustion. It burns hot and long, and almost without smoke. The tree spent decades building a structure optimized for moving water. The kiln has converted that structure into something optimized for holding heat. The hardwood used in kilns like this one is chosen for the density of its grain. The trees on this hillside grow slowly, in thin soil, on a steep slope where the light is good, but the conditions are not easy. Slow growth means tight rings. Tight rings mean dense wood. Dense wood means, at the end of the process, a charcoal that is harder and more refined than what you would get from a faster growing tree. The difficulty of the growing conditions is part of what makes the final product what it is. The trees that were cut for this kiln were not young trees. They were cut from coppiced stools, root systems that have been sending up new shoots for many decades, perhaps longer. The roots are old. The trunks that were cut were perhaps 10 or 15 years of growth from the last cutting, but the roots beneath them remember much longer. The charcoal in this kiln carries, in some sense, the accumulated patience of a root system that has been growing in this hillside for a very long time. Come back to the hillside. You are sitting against the base of a narrow tree on a slope covered in old leaves. The kiln is below you, a low dome of earth, warm and sealed, doing its slow work in the dark. The smoke from the flue is thin and pale. The air around you is warm and smells of wood and something older than wood. The forest is quiet. There is no wind tonight. The leaves above you are still. The trees stand close together, their trunks pale in the dark, their roots going down into the same soft ground your hands are resting on. If your mind has been somewhere else, that is fine. There is nothing here that requires your attention. The kiln is tending itself tonight. The process inside it is not waiting for anyone. The carbon is forming in the dark, whether you think about it or not. The last hydrogen and oxygen leaving the wood cell by cell. The grain of the tree becoming permanent in a new material, black and clean and patient. The warmth from the dome reaches you even here, a few paces uphill. It is the warmth of a very slow combustion, a process so controlled that it barely resembles burning at all. It is more like a long, careful exhale. The wood is breathing out everything it has held since it was alive. The water it drew from the soil, the gases it built from sunlight and air, and what remains when the breath is finished will be something that lasts. There are kilns like this one on hillsides in many parts of the world. There have been for thousands of years. The process is essentially the same everywhere. Seal the wood from the air, apply heat slowly, drive off the water and the volatiles, leave the carbon. The details vary, the shape of the kiln, the species of wood, the duration of the burn, the final temperature, but the principle is the same. It is one of the oldest controlled chemical processes that human beings have used, older than iron smelting, older than glass. The carbon that came out of kilns like this one was used to smelt the first metals, to draw the first lines on cave walls, to filter water, to preserve food. The kiln on this hillside is part of a very long line. The person who built it learned from someone who learned from someone else, and so on back through more generations than anyone has counted. The shape of the dome, the width of the flue, the way the wood is stacked upright so that the gases can travel freely upward. These are not things that were designed on paper. They were arrived at, slowly, by observation and repetition, and the passing of knowledge from one pair of hands to another. You don't need to hold any of that. It's just the background of where you are sitting. The hillside, the kiln, the smoke, the warmth, the long line of people who have sat near kilns like this one, in the dark, waiting for the work to finish. Tonight, you are just here. The kiln is just here. The trees are just here. The smoke rises from the flue in a thin, pale thread. It bends slightly at the top, where a small movement of air catches it, and then it is gone. Another thin thread follows it, and another, slow and steady. The kiln's breathing. You're breathing too, if you notice it. Slow, easy, in and out. The air going in is warm and carries the faint smell of the process below you. The air going out is the same temperature as the night. The dome holds its warmth. The trees hold their stillness. The ground beneath you holds you without effort, the way ground always does, without being asked. You can stay here as long as you want. The kiln will still be here in the morning. The smoke will still be rising. The process inside will have moved forward imperceptibly, the carbon a fraction more refined, the last volatiles a fraction closer to gone. But from the outside, it will look exactly the same. A low dome of earth on a forested hillside, warm to the touch, breathing slowly. The hillside is very quiet now. The kiln holds its heat. The smoke rises and disappears. The trees stand in the dark, their roots in the old soft ground, their trunks pale and still. Inside the sealed dome, the wood is becoming carbon. Slowly, without hurry. Cell by cell, the water and the gases are leaving, and what remains holds the shape of the tree it came from. The grain, the rings, the vessels, in a form that will last a very long time. The warmth reaches you where you are sitting. The smell of the smoke is soft and old. Let the night hold you. Let the hillside hold you. There is nothing left to do. Sleep well.